Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, Soul Talk and Psychic Advice. Now, before we begin, I want to say something important. It's not about blame. It's not about blaming mothers. It's not about blaming anyone. It's really to explain a very important situation that I've been noticing. I'm someone who I scroll through social media, different platforms, and I see this a lot on Instagram. Women, some men talking about issues with moms. So I wanted to explain the mother wound, and this is what it's about. And hopefully, if anybody's feeling triggered or defensive, you just listen slowly. Remember, I like to give information. Sometimes I have a little bit of bias, sure, but I like to give information. And I don't really have much bias in this one because I had a close relationship with my mom before she died. She died when I was 12. I had a close relationship with my son. He died when he was 23. But I have a lot of empathy and compassion for people who don't have those close relationships. I couldn't imagine if I didn't have my mother's love. I would have been totally destroyed because I was going through a lot after she died. And then with my son, I just couldn't imagine if he died and I wasn't close to him. I always thought just, okay, if you have a kid, don't you want to be close? But then, we have our trauma, we have our wounds, there's other issues involved. And, so over time, I've learned that things are more complicated, but I have a lot of compassion for anybody on either side of this because I'm going to explain the mother wound, and there's a reason why they're that way, whether it's right or wrong. I don't want to justify or not justify anything. I don't want to go either way. So let's begin. This episode is definitely not about blame. Most mothers did the best they could with the awareness, resource, nervous system capacity, and healing they had available at the time. Sadly, in our society, no matter what race, religion, social class, is what I'm learning, is that there's a lot of where children weren't nurtured. They're seen but not heard. They were just not, loved or nurtured, so they can't carry that, you know. Many mothers were carrying their own trauma, yes, and hiding secrets of sexual, verbal, physical abuse. Years ago we were told to keep those things secret, don't expose, family issues. My mother kept hers secret. But somehow she managed to love us despite all those things. We just don't know how people are going to respond with their own trauma. Many never experience emotional safety themselves. Many learn to survive disconnecting from their own emotions. And, when I hear the stories of daughters and how their moms treat them, it breaks my heart. I know it comes from somewhere, but it breaks my heart that a daughter has to experience it because no matter what, you were a child, you didn't ask to be born, and you shouldn't have to go through any of this. I'm just trying to explain all of this. I think that's my mission in life is to explain things, and that's why I'm not fighting to have guests yet. I'm a small podcast. I just want to give information and people do with it what they will. I can't control how people feel about the information that I give, but I try to make it from experience and fact base also. So, healing the mother wound isn't about creating resentment, it's about creating awareness. Because what we don't become aware of continues to unconsciously shape our lives. If you ever wondered why you struggle with people pleasing, perfectionism, anxious relationships, overgiving, chronic guilt, emotional exhaustion, difficulty setting boundaries, or constantly questioning yourself, there is a good chance your mother wound is playing a role. Today we're going to explore what the mother wound actually is, how it develops, signs you may carry it, how it affects your nervous system, how it impacts your intuition, and most importantly, how healing begins. So let's get into this. What is a mother wound? The mother wound is emotional pain created when your core developmental needs were not consistently met by your mother or primary caregiver. Those needs include feeling safe, feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling accepted, feeling emotionally supported, feeling loved without having to earn it. No child should have to earn love, right? Feeling free to be yourself. The important word here is consistency. No parent gets it right all the time. No, we all mess up, and I had to apologize to my kid. Definitely. You better believe it. Um, that isn't the goal. Children are incredibly resilient, yes. What creates the wounds is ongoing emotional experiences that teach a child, I am not safe. My feelings don't matter. I have to earn love. I am too much. I am not enough. My needs are a burden. I need to take care of everyone else. Children don't question whether their parents are emotionally unavailable. Instead, they assume something must be wrong with themselves. That belief often follows us into adulthood. It does. And, I think I used some of the mother wound, information to explain my caretakers after my mother died, because I had some terrible caretakers. They were awful. And I wasn't used to bad treatment. And I still got it. And I could imagine if it was my own parent doing it to me, it's even more devastating. But this did affect me. It did throw me off the course. If my mother would have stayed alive, I would have been a whole different type of person in many ways. The mother wound isn't always obvious. When people hear mother wound, they often imagine severe abuse. Sometimes that's true, but many people experience something much more subtle. Maybe your mother loves you deeply. Maybe she provided food, clothing, and shelter. Maybe she worked incredibly hard. And I realize that for a lot of women who struggle or have personality issues or so, they had a mother who more than likely was not in a good situation relationship wise, and then that person dies. And women had to hustle back then. We weren't making that much money. It was hard to get jobs. We had to hustle really hard. Well, I didn't have to, but women back then had to, right? To survive. And they became tough and probably hurt and angry and probably projected that onto kids also. I noticed that a lot of times I would hear people say, well, after my father died, my mother had to hustle so hard to keep everything together, and she just became different. She was shut down, she was cold, she was mean. So there's all these factors that life throws at us. And so, she did all these things, gave you food, clothing, roof over your head, right? The things that are automatic, that should be given. But yet, emotionally, she wasn't available. Perhaps she dismissed your feelings because she felt like hers were, and she passed that on to you. Maybe she criticized you, compared you to siblings, which is the worst, you know, expected perfection, confided in you as though you were her therapist. Yeah, a lot, and that's why a lot of people are empaths, and they can read the room, and they're overgivers and people pleasers because they were a therapist as a child. Needed you to regulate her emotions, made you responsible for her happiness. Don't you disappoint me too. Punished independence, ignored your boundaries. Or perhaps she simply didn't know how to emotionally connect because no one had connected with her. The absence of emotional attunement leaves lasting imprints. You know how we judge? child-free women. And why don't you want to have kids? And you're selfish. And, how could you not want to have kids? They're like, I don't want to parent. I know my limitations. I know my capacity. It doesn't work for me to be a parent. Now imagine it's, prior to 1980, maybe even prior to 1990. And especially if you were in a relationship, you didn't have kids, people were like, are you infertile? What's wrong with you? See, everyone was expected to have children. And women, if you didn't have kids or start having them by 25, 26, what's wrong with you? You're infertile, you're selfish. So a lot of times, people had children that they weren't ready to have because it's the social construct. And they knew they didn't want to have kids. And then way back when there wasn't really birth control and you had to submit to your husband, so you're going to get pregnant. And we make jokes like, oh, grandma was in her moo moo and grandpa laid it down and gave her 9, 10 kids. But did she want that? Or is it that's what was expected? And from the outside looking in, it looks like romance, you know? So a lot of times women were having children that they probably didn't want to have or weren't ready to have or they were scared to have because they knew of their own upbringing and they didn't think they had anything to offer. So a lot of us were brought into the world because, that's what's expected, you know, and so I think that also plays a role in, you know, a lot of us, I'm 55, from that era and before, weren't nurtured properly, a lot of us, because the parents didn't have the skills and it wasn't probably necessarily the desire to have kids, but yet they had kids and some of them learned and some of them grew and some of them apologized, but some didn't, you know? And children were just expected, obey your parents or else, do this or else, do that. So, I see a lot of adults who are super intelligent. They're kind, they're loving, but you could tell when somebody struggles with decisions because they weren't taught that they had a voice as a kid. All of these things play a role into it. And I may banter a lot in this podcast episode more than usual because I'm trying to explain things and give perspective of where this comes from. Again, not to justify, but to explain. Because I think I was able to heal when I realized some of this. I know it's harder when it's your own parent, but, a lot of damage was done to me after my mother died. And I wanted to understand why in the fuck are people like this? How can you be cruel to a child? I wanted to understand it because I didn't grow up with it. We were poor and we struggled, but I didn't grow up with it. And, I lost a good parent when I was 12. And some people never had the good parent, sadly. Children learn about themselves through their mother's eyes. Think about that for a moment. Before children developed a strong sense of identity, they borrow it. Your mother's responses become your internal voice. If she responded with warmth, you learned, I'm lovable, I'm safe, my emotions matter. If she responded with criticism, you may have learned, I need to be perfect. I shouldn't make mistakes. I need to work harder. If she withdrew emotionally, you may have learned, I'm too much. I shouldn't need anyone. My emotions push people away. Children don't have the ability to separate another person's emotional limitations from their own worth. Everything becomes personal. It does. And all of this, it can help you understand certain people in your life too, why they act the way they act. I remember in college there's so many women who are competitive and cold and mean, and now I know why. Because of how they're raised, what they went through, the mother wound, you know, the need for perfection. So how the mother wound shapes the nervous system. This is where embodiment becomes so important. Many people think the mother wound is simply emotional. It's not. It becomes biological. Repeated experiences shape the developing nervous system. If you felt if love felt unpredictable, your nervous system learned unpredictability. If affection came with criticism, your body learned that love isn't completely safe. If your emotions were dismissed, your nervous system learned to suppress emotion. If you constantly walked on eggshells, your body adapted by becoming hypervigilant. You begin scanning facial expressions, voice tones, body language, tiny shifts in energy, not because you're broken, because your nervous system adapted to survive. As adults, we often call these adaptations personality traits. I'm an overthinker. I'm highly anxious. I'm a people pleaser. I'm independent. I'm hyper responsible. But many of these traits begin as survival strategies. That's where this comes from. It's all about survival, and this is why when we see someone in a abusive relationship and they go, but I love him, but I love her. Men get abused too. This is where it comes from. So when you're on the outside looking in saying, don't you see it? Get out, get out. No, because this stuff started way before that relationship. You can't just say, get out. You have to unravel everything. You have to peel off the layers so that they can understand why they're there in the first place. Common signs of the mother wound. Let's explore some signs. Some of the signs are you constantly seek validation. I mean, constantly. We all seek a little bit, right? But you're seeking it a lot. And you're caring about what other people think. You second guess yourself all the time. We all do sometimes, but you're doing it all the time. You feel guilty saying no. You apologize excessively. You overgive. You become responsible for everyone's emotions. You fear disappointing people. You avoid conflict. You struggle to receive help. You feel uncomfortable resting. You constantly compare yourself. You never feel good enough. You become attracted to emotionally unavailable people. You confuse chaos with love. You believe your worth comes from what you do rather than who you are. You feel responsible for fixing others. You become everyone's therapist. You feel guilty prioritizing yourself. You struggle to identify your own needs. If several of these resonates, you're certainly not alone. You're not. Some of these resonated with me. I did these things, but not because of my mom, but because of the caretakers afterwards. The mother wound and people pleasing. One of the biggest outcomes of the mother wound is people pleasing. People pleasing isn't kindness. It isn't compassion. It's usually a survival strategy. At some point, your nervous system learned if other people are happy, I'm safe. So you learn to monitor everyone else's state. You became incredibly intuitive. But here's something important. Many highly sensitive people think they're simply gifted at reading energy. And often they are. But trauma can create hypervigilance that looks remarkably similar. You constantly are reading the room, watching people's moods, predicting reactions, trying to avoid upsetting anyone. This isn't intuition, it's survival. True intuition feels calm, hypervigilance feels urgent. One comes from regulation, the other comes from fear. And, you know, now it makes sense to me. I've wrote about and I spoke about how a lot of people I know who are psychic, some were just difficult. Some were just really hard to deal with and they wanted to fight. They wanted to fight in our private communities. And now I know why. Because of how their gift probably developed and maybe they had some of it that they were born with also, but the things that weren't healed, you know And it helps. Knowing this stuff has helped me in so many ways to heal so many things, and that's just what I want for other people, to just have a different perception. Sometimes we get stuck thinking one way, but healing comes from when you expand and you open yourself up to learning something new. Why boundaries feel so difficult. If you have the mother wound, boundaries often feel terrifying. Not because boundaries are dangerous, because somewhere along the way your nervous system learned love requires self sacrifice, need creates rejection. Saying no creates conflict. Disappointing someone means abandonment. So every boundary feels like survival. That's why boundaries aren't just a mindset issue, they're a nervous system issue. You don't simply think boundaries are unsafe, your body feels they're unsafe. Healing means teaching your nervous system that you can disappoint someone and still be safe. The mother wound and self trust. Perhaps the deepest wound is losing trust in yourself. If your emotions were dismissed, you stopped trusting your emotions. If your instincts were questioned, you stopped trusting your instincts. If your perceptions were minimized, you stopped trusting your reality. Many adults constantly ask, "What do you think I should do?" because they were taught that someone else always knew better. Healing means coming home to yourself, learning to hear your own inner wisdom again. The mother wound in relationships. Without healing, we often create familiar dynamics. We choose partners who require proving, who are emotionally unavailable, who need fixing, who give consistent affection, not because we consciously want pain, because familiarity feels safe. Your nervous system mistakes familiar for healthy. Your nervous system mistakes familiar for healthy. Healing changes who feels attractive. Calm begins to feel safe. Consistent, Consistency feels comforting. Mutuality feels normal. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens as your nervous system begins expecting something different. Healing begins with awareness. Healing isn't pretending your childhood didn't happen. Healing is understanding how your experiences shape your presence. Awareness interrupts unconscious patterns. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you begin asking, "What happened to me?" That single shift changes everything because shame begins to soften. Compassion begins to grow. Healing through embodiment. One reason talk therapy alone sometimes isn't enough is because a mother wound doesn't just live in memories, it lives in the body. Healing requires helping your nervous system experience safety. This may include deep breathing, grounding, EFT, somatic tracking, gentle movement, orienting, vagus nerve regulation, body awareness. These practices aren't about forcing yourself to calm down. They're about teaching your nervous system a new experience. Over time, your body learns, I can rest, I can say no, I can have needs, I can receive love, I don't have to earn my worth. Reparenting yourself. Yes, reparenting that child, that wounded child. One of the most beautiful parts of healing is reparenting. Reparenting means becoming the safe adult you needed. Yes, it means asking yourself, what do I need today? What emotions need space? How can I comfort myself? How can I protect myself? How can I speak kindly to myself? Slowly, your inner dialogue changes. Instead of criticism, you offer compassion. Instead of pressure, you offer patience. Instead of shame, you offer understanding. This is how neural pathways are built. Yes, healing doesn't mean your mother has to change because she probably won't. And you probably have to go into acceptance of this is who she is, this is how she is. Some people just lock into who they are. This is important. Sometimes mothers heal. Sometimes relationships improves. Sometimes beautiful reconciliation happens. Sometimes it doesn't. Your healing does not depend upon another person's healing. Waiting for someone to become emotionally available keeps you Healing keeps your healing on hold. Healing begins the moment you decide to become emotionally available to yourself. Do not wait for someone to apologize because they may never do it. Reflection questions. Before we finish, I like to leave you with a few questions. When do I feel most responsible for other people's emotions? Ask yourself. What beliefs about love did I learn growing up? What parts of myself have I hidden in order to feel accepted? Where do I abandon myself to keep the peace? What would change if I truly believed I was already enough? Yes. Take some time to journal on these questions. You might be surprised by what comes forward. Final thoughts. If today's episode brought up emotions, please be gentle with yourself. Healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you were before you learned you had to earn love, before you believed you were too much, before you believed your needs were inconvenient, before you stopped trusting yourself. You were always worthy. You were always enough. And every time you regulate your nervous system, every time you honor your boundaries, every time you choose self-compassion over self-criticism, you're healing the mother wound one small step at a time. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone. And, you know, hopefully it gives you something to think on. Because when you're left with this mother wound, the only thing that's left is trying to find a way to navigate through it and heal yourself and regulate your nervous system. And there may always be that disappointment, in that person, that mom, that caretaker who isn't going to apologize. Hey, my caretakers are still alive. They're not going to apologize to me. And if I would have waited, you know, it would have been awful. And so I would have suffered more if I would have waited. And so, find a way to accept that's just who they are, and it's disappointing. It's unfortunate, but you get to set yourself free. You deserve emotional freedom. You deserve to be everything that you want to be in life. And don't let trauma take that away from you. Trauma's real, it stays with us, but it doesn't have to overpower us and overcome us forever. There's ways to work through it, there's ways to navigate through it, there's ways to heal it and to accept what has happened, but move forward. So I want to thank you for listening today. I know this is a little bit different, but I need to throw in these type of talks soon. I was down the woo-woo trail for a while, and I will get back to that. And I want to thank you for listening again. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next episode.